Hello, everybody. Idre here, and today I'm going to be doing another tier ranking video. I did one last week with Depeche Mode. This is obviously a band that I am obsessed with. I love a lot. Probably my favorite band. Actually, they are my favorite band. But today I'm doing The Who. The reason I'm doing a tier ranking of all of The Who's studio albums plus Live at Leeds, because I mean it's a little too important to leave out. The reason I'm doing The Who specifically is because out of all the classic rock bands from the 70s, The Who has always been one of my favorites, if not my favorite. There's just something about their British mod beginnings and then their more hard rockin' days in the early 70s and mid 70s that really just grabbed my attention. They have a standout sound. I love Pete Townshend's writing. I love John Entwistle's bass playing. Overall, they are just a great band. And I decided I would take the time and do a tier ranking of all of their albums plus Live at Leeds because I have some in-depth feelings about all of them. Let's get right into this. Just let me share my screen. All right, here we go. This, as you see at the bottom here, we have all of the Who's albums and Live at Leeds, and they are in chronological order. Let's get started. And a bit of started here. The way I have it set up is if I were to give these formal reviews, what scores would I give them? So I have 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and then 4 or below. So anything that would be considered a very negative review. But let's just get right into it. The first album is My Generation. My Generation. What are my genuine thoughts on where My Generation belongs on this list? From a critical standpoint, this album seems to get the most, not the most, that's wrong. I mean, Who's Next gets the most, but this album gets a lot of praise. And, well, I understand that it is a very important album, and it is a really good album. I just don't think it is nearly as good as some of the ones that would come later. And I'm going to put My Generation in around that 7 block. The reason I put it there is because as much as I love their early mod beginnings, their mod sound in general, I do think that it is safe to say that My Generation does sound, it's not produced as well. And obviously that had to do with the limitations of the time. And overall, I think from a track-by-track basis, not every single song is nearly as impactful as some of their later works. But obviously, it's a crucial album to their discography. Really important, fun, straight to the point, much more raw album in their career. Really solid debut. I mean, the 7 is a good place to get started. Now we have a quick one, their second album. This is another one that's going down that similar mod route. And I have seen people not like this one as much, not be as into this one, and I get it. It is a bit of a more off-putting album. It's not necessarily their most accessible album, but there are some great songs on here. I believe I can't always remember the exact track list of the American and then the UK versions, but you know songs like Happy Jack are great, Boris the Spider are great. I believe A Quick One While He's Away is on this album. But once again, I feel like it does suffer from the same thing that My Generation suffers from. It's not. I think it is definitely a product of the 60s. Not every single song is nearly as memorable as some of their later albums. However, I still enjoy A Quick One quite a bit. Some great material on there. I'm also actually going to put it right here in that 7 tier with My Generation. I actually view both of these albums as equals in terms of quality. I think that both of them provide stuff that, I don't know, to me they go together perfectly. Their sounds fit perfectly. But now once we get to these next few, this is where things get a bit more in-depth, a bit more different sounding. But, you know, let's just get into it. The Who Sell Out. This one is interesting, to say the least, because I feel like I have some controversial opinions when it comes down to this album overall. I think that, honestly, my honest opinion, I don't think it's as good as these two. The reason I don't think it is because even though I get it that it is a bit more psychedelic, a bit more, I guess, experimental in terms of what they were doing at the time, and even though it was sort of them really pushing outside their boundaries, something about this album to me just comes across a little it's not as cohesive, I feel like, as some of their other projects. Like, I don't know. There's just something off-putting about it to me that unfortunately makes me put it in that 6 range, which is still positive. That means I still like it. I mean, it just means I don't love it. I just think that, well, I Can See for Miles is a great song, and overall, there's a lot of good songs on here. I just think that the sound of this one seems to be a bit more wishy-washy, like they were really still that they were kind of just figuring out where they wanted to go next. And unfortunately that is why it ended up where it ended up. But I still like the Who Sell Out. It's still a fun album for sure, but unfortunately I think it's one rank below My Generation and A Quick One. But now we get to some of their most popular, some of their most praised works. So Tommy, their first real rock opera, or I should say, kind of real concept album. And without a doubt, this is a classic. I mean, in some sense, it did set the standard for rock operas, which came after it, which was something that was, without a doubt, really important because some of the greatest bands would go on to do this kind of stuff, and including them, they would go on to make another one. Where do I end up putting it? Well, I would put it right in this sort of 8 range. And I would put it in that 8 range because I think that, well, it is a great rock opera. It is a really good album. Keep in mind, an 8 is the threshold for me to classify it as a classic album. So that's pretty good. Uh, I think that it's written really well. It may come across a little more goofy than than your usual rock operas, but I do think that Pete Townshend's writing is really at the top of his game here. I think overall the songs themselves, the concept behind it, well, it is really abstract, comes together nicely. I will say my one major complaint with Tommy is the fact that Roger Daltrey seems to be toned down a little bit. I wish he let loose a little more with his vocals. But I do think that it was, up to this point, their best album in the 60s. And yeah, let's move on. We are getting to their first live album, Live at Leeds, which actually did feature a lot of the songs from Tommy. It was from, I believe, that tour. I can't remember when exactly the actual recording was. I think it was 1969 or 1970. I'm sorry. I'm just going to be right up front. I am going to put Live at Leeds right in this 9 rank. To me, the Who's live sound was in many ways better than some of their recorded sound, at least on a few of these works, especially compared to the actual album Tommy and some of the other albums in the '60s. Not to put them down, but I do think that Live at Leeds did a great job capturing the essence of just how hectic and energetic and loud the Who's live show in the '70s and even in the late 60s were. I mean, everybody's on top of their game here. You know, we have and Twistle, I think Heaven or Hell is on here, which is an excellent song that I wish got a proper studio recording on an album. Overall, Live at Leeds is an excellent album. The expanded editions that would come out later are just as good, if not better. I think that Live at Leeds is one of the best live albums ever recorded. That is why I put it in that 9 rank, because it truly is a great album. Truly is one of the best live albums out there, and I think it captured the essence of the Who's energetic live show and loud live show perfectly in the 70s. So that's why Live at Leeds is where it is. And next up, we have Who's Next, which I like quite a bit. That shouldn't be shocking. Anybody who likes the Who has to like Who's Next. And actually, obviously I'm just a little image right now, but I actually have Who's Next up on my wall right now. But yeah, Who's Next? Excellent album. It definitely was them crafting their sound into a much more harder package, sort of taking that live energy and sort of for the first time really bringing it into their sound with it, up to this point, one of their more hard rock sounding albums compared to their more mod and 60s sounding albums. I'm gonna put it right up here in the 9, which is an extremely positive review, extremely great score, even if it's not a 10. I think that between the opening tracks and the closing tracks, which are 2 of their most iconic tracks, Bob O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again, within the album is some of their greatest material, Behind Blue Eyes, Going Mobile, My Wife, Bargain, you name it. Some of their best songs. Also, this was really a quintessential really well, really good track list for a standard rock album. It's about that standard, traditional rock vinyl album length. And overall, very little negative to say here. But now you might be wondering, if I have nothing negative to say about Who's Next, why isn't it a 10? Well, because I'm sort of reserving the 10 spot for the album that I think is a 10, Quadrophenia. I think Quadrophenia belongs in that 10 rank. Now, yes, I don't have a problem putting more than one album up there, but to me, the one thing that Quadrophenia does that makes it a 10 that Who's Next doesn't is that Quadrophenia not only has all the great parts of Who's Next, all the great energy, all the great hard rock, all the great talent, all the great writing, it also is a rock opera like Tommy, but done in a way that is even better, more grand, more operatic than before. I think Quadrophenia is the Who's magnum opus. It is everybody on that album is on top of their game, between Keith Moon going insane on the drums, between Roger Daltrey's powerful vocals, and also I think it's worth noting that you know Entwistle's bass was good, and Pete Townshend's writing was really just on top of his game. Pete Townshend's the story of Quadrophenia is also what makes it at the top for me. It is just really interesting insight. It's like taking their mod roots, what they grew up in, and writing a whole album about that. And a lot of the mental health aspects of it as well. Overall, I mean, there's not too much else I could say other than the fact that I think it is one of the best albums ever written. Not only is it just an excellent rock opera, it's just an excellent classic rock album. And one of my favorite classic rock albums of all time, I don't hesitate putting it at a 10. So let's move on. Now we have Who by Numbers. I'm not necessarily sure where I should put this one because I do enjoy it. I think it is still a solid album. They were still on a roll. However, I do think that unfortunately this was also kind of the beginning of, I think, the slope downwards for the Who. Not that it's bad or anything, but I think they really did peak with like Who's Next, Quadrophenia, and let's see where, man, I'm kind of debating where I should put this one because I didn't really think about this too much beforehand. I'm trying to just think off the top of my head. I'm gonna put Who by Numbers in this 7 tier. It's good. I enjoy it, but I don't think it really reaches the level of greatness of a Tommy, of a Who's Next, of a Quadrophenia. I feel like in general the band was still going down their hard rock route pretty strongly. Everybody sounds good here. It's well written. Dreaming from the Waist is actually one of my favorite underrated Who songs, I think. And Squeezebox is a fun one. But I just don't think that this album has the impact that these guys do up here. So that is why it's only at 7. Still a solid album. Don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, it has to land somewhere. And now we get to the final album with Keith Moon, Who Are You? Now, this one to me, I think gets a bit too much criticism. I've seen people actually criticize this album quite heavily, saying that it was the worst album with Keith Moon. I honestly disagree. I debate putting it up in the 8 tier, but I'm probably going to put it in that 7 tier. The reason being because as much as I love it, as much as I appreciate the album, is it really a crucial moment in their career? If Keith Moon hadn't died, would this album be as, let's say, rememberable or memorable? Why did I say rememberable? Memorable. I'm going to put it in the 7 tier, which I'm just going to remind everybody once again, is good. If you have 4 albums that are 7s and 3 albums that are above 7s, that's a good track record. So any hardcore Who fans watching this, do not take that the wrong way. I still like Who Are You. I think it is a solid album. I think the track Who Are You is excellent. Even Sister Disco, as criticized and as goofy as that song may be, I think that's one of the best on here. and Twistle has some great tracks on here as well. And honestly, I think Keith Moon's playing was really great here. I mean, I actually don't think he was doing bad here at all in terms of a stylistic place. If anything, I think he was doing great. And yeah, now we get, so now we have the 4 albums without Keith Moon. Face Dances. Now this isn't, see, this one's one where I feel conflicted on, because I do enjoy Face Dances. I really do. However, it's just seeing all these other albums here, it feels wrong to put it on the same level. Because I do think, even though I do enjoy Face Dances, and I think it is a good album, to say it's on par with My Generation, or to necessarily say it's even on par with Who Are You, I think it's a little wrong. And I just want to remind everybody once again that a 6 is still a positive score. That means I still enjoy it. I still like it. However, I'm going to have to put Face Dances in that 6 range. It's a good album. You know, after everything the band had gone through with Keith Moon dying, realistically, they could have just stopped. But they kept going. And while I do think up to this point, it is arguably their weakest album, but when this one was released, the album still has some great material on it. Don't get me wrong, there is some good songs. You Better You Bet, you know, a lot of good stuff on here, and I do think it's definitely the best with Kenny Jones. I think that his drumming was, it's Kenny Jones, but I do think it was definitely a step in the, they could have made a worse album, let's say the least. And unfortunately, the next one I'm going to talk about, It's Hard, was that worse album. I'm going to be upfront. I'm going to put this in the 4 or less. Like I said, anything above a 5 is good, like a positive score. Anything below a 5 is a negative score. So that means that everything before It's Hard, I could find some level of just enjoyment from it. I could enjoy all these albums up to this point, but It's Hard is one of the few albums in their discography that, to me, is just it's the sound of a band ready to break up. And to be fair, they actually did for a little bit before they ended up getting back together and, with Zach Starkey and everything. But to me, It's Hard has very few highlights other than Eminence Front. Athena, to me, is not, that's one of my least favorite bigger songs from this album. In general, it's a really just, it's a messy album. It's really just pieced together, very outdated sounding, more outdated than even their 70s material. And unfortunately, I just have a hard time liking this album, and that is why it is in that 4 or less category, unfortunately. But that would be their last album in the 20th century before they would come back in the 2000s decade with Endless Wire, which is an album that I think does get a bit of criticism, as expected. Really anything at this point that they would do would get a fair amount of criticism. And I do enjoy it, but once again, and you have to ask yourself, and I have to ask myself, is it as good as all of this? No. I mean, is it better than Face Dances? It's debatable, which is why I'm thinking about putting it right here in that 6 category, which is where I'm actually going to put it. It is an all right album. I think that there are some real standout tracks. It's Not Enough is, I think, one of their best later tracks. And overall, I think that the concept behind it was very well thought out and relatively well executed. I just, you really got to put it in perspective here. We are talking about a band with some of the best albums of all time, like Quadrophenia, Who's Next, Tommy, even Live at Leeds. And it's like, do I really think Endless Wire is that on par with it? Unfortunately, no. And then this leads us to Who? Their 2019 album that is, I'm going to take a wild guess and say probably their last album. I'm going to put it right here in that 5 tier. I am very indifferent on this album. I really didn't like it, but I also didn't dislike it. I thought that it was interesting to hear what they were up to nowadays, and I do think that for the most part, it was what I expected, but it's definitely not on par with anything else they've done, except it is better than It's Hard, in my opinion. It's just not that impressive of an album. And what was I really expecting? I mean, these guys are all in their 70s now, but either way, this is my tier ranking of The Who's studio albums and Live at Leeds. Bit of a recap. These four up here, Quadrophenia, Who's Next, Tommy, and the live album Live at Leeds, to me are all timeless classics, without a doubt, some of the best classic rock albums ever made. And honestly, even this 7 tier with like My Generation, A Quick One, Who by Numbers, and Who Are You are all great, are all really good albums as well. A 7 is a common score I give to albums I like quite a bit. I really do like these albums a lot. Then Who Sell Out, Face Dances, and Endless Wire ended up in the 6th tier, meaning I do enjoy them. I do think they are good. I just don't think they're really at that good to the point where I need to be honoring them or anything like that. And then 5 and 4, I mean, these are the two albums that I just think are kind of weak. They don't provide much for me, unfortunately. But with that being said, that is my official Who tier ranking list. Thought I'd do this. I had a lot of fun doing my Depeche Mode one, so I figured why not cover a classic rock band, because quite frankly, I don't really talk much about classic rock much on this channel really at all, unless an old classic rock band really releases an album. So I figured why not give a shot at my favorite classic rock band, The Who. Great band, some great albums. So yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing, and yeah, that is it. Thank you for anybody who tuned in. I should probably have a great classics album video probably coming out next week. I am just not 100% sure when I'm gonna do that, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this tier ranking of The Who, and with that being said, adios.